Good evening. I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting of the ISD 191 Burnsville Egan Savage School Board. The date is October 24th, 2019, and the time is 6:30 p.m. I'd like to start by welcoming folks who joined us in our audience, both in person and at home. We always appreciate people taking time out of what we all know are very busy schedules to learn about the work of our district. So thank you. With that, Director Courier, would you please lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will start by approving tonight's agenda. I will take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Starting our information section of tonight's meeting, I would like to invite Jason Sellers, coordinator of ALC and ABE, and Jessica Anderson to the podium. We will receive a report on summer school, elementary, and middle school. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. We're going to be as brief as possible, so we're going to get the show on the road. The first slide just indicates kind of the purpose of the presentation, which is to review the programming as brief as possible for what happened in summer for the K-4 program and the FiveSeven program, as well as an EL pilot program that we implemented. This slide shares with you, of course, that there are parameters around ALC targeted services and that we have to follow all the parameters that are on this slide. And should you have any questions, we can answer later.
Okay. Oh, it's me already. Good evening, Chair Alt, Superintendent, and board members. So I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the locations. Our K-4 program was held at Hidden Valley, and adjacent to that was our FiveSeven and EL program at Eagle Ridge. As you can see in the slides, we ran for 6 weeks, June 17th through August 1st, and we were 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Thursday. The next slide is a brief overview of the attendance per grade, and we had 675 students enrolled with an average daily attendance of 530. Next slide, as we're clipping through, shows the demographics. This shows the demographics of the students. And the next slide talks about some of our partnerships, Burnsville YMCA, U of M Extension, Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, McCall Pond Environmental Learning Center, and the Jeffers Foundation Outdoor Classroom.
And so the program at the K-4 site really focused on trying to follow best practice. As you saw on the previous slide, Minnesota Department of Education suggests quality standards for summer programming. They suggest that it's 4 days a week. They suggest that it's a full day. They suggest that it's 6 weeks if you can do it. And so we followed all those standards. To be clear, this was a brand new model for summer programming in the district. This has never occurred before in our district. And so I didn't put a slide this time, unlike the STEM program, thanking all the folks that made this happen. But there were a lot of people in this district, teachers, students, families, parents, and all departments that came together to make this happen. 120-minute literacy blocks, 90-minute math blocks. The focus was really on experiential learning, which is what MDE suggests we focus on in the summer, and that was through science. So we partnered with the outdoor classroom and tried to, and also added specialist classes to give the students not only learning, but fun and engaging learning through a particular theme. The next slide outlines those themes. So if you were to walk through kindergarten classrooms, you would see them growing, following the life cycle of ladybugs that they actually grow and watch and observe, butterflies, the whole sort of kit and caboodle. We had students that would visit different places around the campus, but then also take field trips to get water samples. We had students who grew plants, actually seeded them, and then we got emails from parents who were so excited about it when the plant actually grew on their balcony, on their apartment, or in their home, and they sent those videos to us. So it was really about learning themes. The enrichment opportunities, we've already reviewed some of these. Just note that in terms of specialists, we had recreation sports, movement and motion. We had a cooking class, which is by far and away was our most popular specialist class, and 2 art classes.
Okay, and the next 3 slides are going to be the growth and averages in math, reading, writing, and social and emotional. So I just wanted to show that it was localized and embedded assessments that we did at the beginning of the season, so pre-assessments and post-assessments, and we do have it broken down by grade and percentages. I will share that on the first grade, it shows kind of one of the smaller average growths, and we've discussed it as a staff that likely maybe the students coming in were at a higher level when they came into our summer program, or we're considering reviewing the curriculum for that grade. So something that we're discussing for next year. But these are the average growths per grade in math. And then the second slide is for reading and writing. We believe we have good growth in all those areas. As you can see, the percentages are all above 13% as growth. And then social emotional assessment. Again, we have 2 areas that were, or 2 grades that were maybe lower in the growth area, and we're thinking that it might be, again, some curriculum that we should look at, or talking to the teachers and the students. For the kindergarten, what's interesting is that it was really cute and simple. So the kids were part of the assessment, as simple as raising their hand, and how did they progress throughout the summer? Were they better at raising their hand and waiting at the end of summer school? And a lot of the teachers that have the kids in the school year said that they were. So they did notice growth in some of our little people. Another area, third grade, is another area that was kind of low in a growth, 3.56, and we're considering, again, looking at the curriculum, and maybe students at that grade were coming in at a high growth rate. Let me see. We also implemented PBIS to be aligned with the school year, so students received tickets, and every Thursday, Jason would get on the microphone, and we would call the kids up to the office, and they would get to turn in those tickets to get prizes. And I think Jason enjoyed purchasing all those gifts more so, because he felt like a Santa every Thursday. But it was great to see that it was aligned with the school year, and kids were really excited to get those PBIS tickets. And at the end of the year, Jason also dressed up as the mascot. So the kids got to see that and had a good time. So we feel like that we did a very good job with helping our students grow emotionally and socially this summer.
And the key for ALC, as I've said before, is our job is to support the core. So what can we do in summer, what can we do after school hours to support what's happening in the core, so that those students have every opportunity, even more opportunity, to succeed and achieve at their grade level. And so following programmatic pieces like PBIS in the summer or after school is important to us, making sure that we're looking and reviewing at student data to see what their needs are so we can target some of that instruction is something that we try to do as much as possible. Keep in mind, it's 10 elementary schools going into 1. It's 3 middle schools going into 1. So you have students from everywhere. We had teachers that were in district and teachers that were out of the district. So you're really building, 3 schools in the summer when we're doing this. In terms of staffing, that's the staffing summary. I really won't go into it. All the pictures, by the way, I will point out, are from students actually in the summer, and they weren't posed. You can tell they are all just live action photos. In terms of the FiveSeven program, which is housed at Eagle Ridge, and I will say this, the biggest reason why we chose Hidden Valley and Eagle Ridge, because there was some question around that. There was construction in front of Eagle Ridge and Hidden Valley. Biggest reason why we chose it is it had the most capacity to house the most students, so we didn't have to waitlist students. We didn't have to turn them away. And that was the reason why, and that's why we're choosing to do it again this next summer, because we don't want to turn anybody away. In terms of enrollment, the numbers are there. We had 441 students enrolled, average daily attendance of 220. These are the demographics. Partnerships, some of the very same partnerships. I would like to point out that the last 2 summers and also after school in BYC, we partner with the Garage. Students are bused over to the Garage, and they have Music Performance 101. They have Music Production 101, and there are lots of great videos with that. But they also end up taking a wilderness inquiry camping trip at the end of summer for those students that want to sign up, and they actually have a blast. In terms of the courses, I'm particularly proud of this, worked with a team of people. We added a virtual reality class. We added a film animation class, so there are actually films of kids getting chased down by dinosaurs. They actually did all that work. We had a build your own skateboard class, and in these classes we integrated and embedded the reading, writing, and or math standards. A lot of math in building a skateboard. A lot of reading and writing to build a film animation project that then you have to actually complete. The writing and reading development is listed below for those classes, so we try to make them as cool as possible so kids enjoy them even though it's still summer school. Enrichment Opportunities, there's a long list there that they participated in. In terms of Alignment Division 191, these are our goals. Our goals are to get them interested in college and career pathways that we have at the high school. We want to get them to have that very first taste and get interested in programming computers, interested in virtual reality and the careers that are in the tech field. And that's the program staffing for Eagle Ridge. The second to last slide talks about program sustainability. This is important. We really care about being great fiscal stewards. I can tell you this, that the revenues generated from the K-4 program, the FiveSeven program, and the EL pilot program more than covered the costs for each of those programs. So there was no negative fiscal balance for any of these programs. The last slide is we worked with the multilingual department here in Maria Arago and CISA to identify students in buildings who really were new to country, level 1 or very low level 2. We targeted them to register for this program. It was housed at Eagle Ridge in one of the pods, and the goal is really to work on their academic content language so they can access the math and do it. Work on their academic content language so they can meet some of those grade level standards, because we know they need a little extra than what the core is going to provide them, even in a tier 3 intervention, which summer school is. And so the goal was to try something. We've done that. I believe it was reasonably successful. And then this next summer, the goal would be to have its own set-aside program at perhaps a different elementary school where we'd have multiple sections at each grade level, and it would be its own site. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I will open it up for questions. Director Schatz.
Thank you. Those numbers are great. So many students. So was that comparable to the K-4 program was the new piece this year, but the 5 to 7 is the BYC?
It was yes and no. The K-4 program at Hidden Valley was brand new, where all 10 elementaries went into one. The 5-7 program, in fact, was new, where all 3 middle schools went into one. The previous summer, we ran a BYC summer program where there was still the other middle school model that was happening for 14 half days, and it was at one of the other middle schools. We bused those students that wanted to be at our BYC summer program a year ago, because ours was an all-day, Monday through Friday program. Right. Now it's just one program, and so all students had access to these classes from all 3 middle schools, instead of the students that just applied or just registered for our program last summer.
Okay, and so are the students are all from this district, though they're not?
Correct.
So
well, I should say we had a handful of students that live in our district or in another district, but that do attend our summer programming. So
It was about 20.
yeah, about 20.
I believe about 20.
Yeah.
Okay, and the numbers that you had for there was a high daily average attendance for the K-4 program, and a lower half-ish of the 5 to 7 grade. Is that consistent with previous, even though this is a little bit newer model, is that consistent with previous years?
Yeah, it's what we experienced last summer. And so typically we see that at the middle school level, we'll have parents that register students for it. Whether or not the students want to come, and that gets worked out before summer school starts at home. And so we typically have a higher enrollment and a little bit relative to the K-4 program, lower daily attendance rate. But then there were other things. We fielded a number of questions around, family logistics. Hey, I really want my kid to be a part of this. Can they be a part of it for 3 weeks and not all 6 because we're going to go on a family vacation? And we said yes. Can they be a part of it for the first week, but we're going to grandma's in Chicago the second week and be back the last 4 weeks? And so there is some of that is also in there. And then there are some students who had family members and they registered, and for whatever reason, they never showed up.
Okay, but that's consistent with previous years and just as maybe a logistical
Consistent with here, and then also what I've seen when I've been in other districts and run this type of programming. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And how are students selected for the program? So they self-register for both levels of the program?
Yeah, it's kind of a process. We send out registration forms to each of our school sites. We send them out with their graduation requirements. And so that teachers are registering students who they feel would be a good fit for the summer program based on what they're seeing in their classroom, and they have to qualify via one of the graduation incentives. So if you are behind grade level relative to your peers, if you speak English as a second language, if you are referred by a teacher because maybe they feel like you need some help in certain specific sort of like math content standards in a grade level, all those pieces would qualify you.
Does that happen so a teacher could also register, not just the family?
Well, the teacher would send,
Sorry,
would
say-
recommend to the family
Recommend.
that the students would,
But would, okay. So as we've seen you saw the nice growth in many of the areas, math, reading, social, emotional, across grade levels, of course, with the anomalies that you pointed out. So is there any way that we then assess how that carries over into the school year? Is there any way to evaluate?
We get asked that question a lot, and the answer is it's really difficult to be able to do that. I can tell you, we can share anecdotally examples where teachers have contacted us and said, hey, this child was in summer school. I talked to their teacher from last year. They are kind of a different student in math. They actually like math now. Or, they're really excited about reading, and in particular about nature, that sort of thing. So there's no quantitative data that we're able to collect on that.
And I would add to that, too, that we had such a great staff. I know every other year was, too. But we had great staff that were really engaging with the kids. So I would add that there's even like a community engagement piece, that there were 80 staff at the K4 site. There were other adults or mentors in the lives of these children that made a positive impact. And I think if you were at home under supervision of an older sibling, you weren't getting that same engagement piece. So they were having essentially 80 mentors around them for 6 weeks. And so there was a larger scale of community engagement that these kids benefited from that I think matured them as little human beings. And so then they showed up for school year with maybe a little mature of an attitude.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great questions. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Just a quick one.
Director Miller.
On the improvement or the assessment slides you had, were those assessments universally given for the whole grade level, for the whole cohort? Okay. So, just a question about that.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
And those are averages.
Understand. I just wanted to make sure the end population was the entire group.
Oh, yeah. So the same every first grader received the same pre-assessment and the same post-assessment.
Perfect. Thanks.
Great. Wrapping it up, I have just a couple comments and questions, kind of dovetailing on Director Schatz's questions. Just a comment probably for Director Battle and Assistant Superintendent Gersich that this kind of information, looking at our students the students that have been in summer school and paying attention to their trajectory, would really be interesting to see, and I think would be rewarding for any of our staff members and parents to really be able to recognize that, yes, our summer school has the academic and the enrichment components necessary to make that change. Next time we receive this report, and perhaps as a follow-up to tonight, I think it would be helpful for us to have that comparison of demographics. Lots going on, I get it. It would be nice to know the demographics of the students in the program versus the overall demographics for that particular grade grouping. And then finally, really just a comment about I'm just loving what I see in the enrichment and the core programming that we have for our kids, because we know that the academics are so very important, and the enrichment that the kids are getting really are helping to round them out as people, and you want them to be engaged, and so while they're getting the academics, they're also getting that enrichment to just kind of push them along. So kudos to the team really for making it a really vibrant summer school program for our kids. Thank you. And thank you very much for your report.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Next, I would like to invite Erin Tinklenberg, Director of Communications, to the podium. We will receive a Levy Referendum information campaign update. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Alt, members of the board, and Superintendent Battle. Thank you for having me here tonight. My plan is just to give you a little bit of an update on where we are in terms of communicating about the Levy referendum and provide some information about the referendum itself. Won't be new information for all of you, but it will be maybe for some of the people who are watching. So here's what I'm going to go over tonight, just some key facts about the referendum and talk a little bit about how we've been informing the community and encouraging people to vote ongoing and as Election Day approaches. So some key facts about the levy. Of course, Election Day is November 5th, coming up just a couple of weeks away. Voters will be asked whether to approve an increase of about $1.7 million for Burnsville schools. The levy, of course, is an operating referendum, which means it provides funding for day-to-day expenses that help maintain our support services, our programs, and everything else we do on a day-to-day basis. We are sharing, of course, that these would minimize but not necessarily eliminate budget cuts, budget reductions that might be necessary. The district will still have to right-size to respond to lagging state aid, so that special education cross-subsidy, and potential changes in enrollment. Some additional information about what the referendum actually will be. What voters will be asked whether or not to approve is revoking the two existing voter-approved levies that we have right now and replacing those with one referendum, one levy that would provide up to $1,900 per pupil or the state maximum, whichever is less. And right now, the state maximum is quite a bit below that, about $1,780 per student. The idea is that this would keep us at the state maximum for the next 10 years. The tax impact, the estimated tax impact is less than $7 per month on a $250,000 home, which is about average in our district. And I did want to mention that there are some opportunities out there for Minnesota tax credits and deferrals that may affect certain property owners. A couple that I found in particular, if a homeowner's adjusted gross income is less than about $113,000, they may qualify for the homestead credit refund. In addition, senior citizens whose income is $60,000 or less may be able to defer a portion of their property taxes. Basically, that program limits the total amount of property taxes that they pay based on their income and helps provide predictability for somebody who might be on a fixed income. So those programs are out there, and if people need more information, they can contact us. We can help them find it. A little bit more about how to contact us. Of course, we have all of the information about the referendum on our website, isd191.org/referendum. People can contact us by email or by phone, and it's not too late for people to request a presentation. So a little bit about how we've been communicating and what our communication goals are as we go through this. Basically, from a very broad perspective, we take it as our responsibility to provide clear, accurate, consistent information about what's going on. There are laws, there are administrative rulings that really guide us as we go forward with this. So for instance, as you all know very well, we can't advocate for or against the referendum. We just provide factual information and encourage people to vote and let them know how they can cast a vote. That clear, consistent, accurate information is really what we're trying to do. In terms of how we do it, one of our main strategies is creating materials that include that consistent, clear, and accurate information, and that those materials can be copied or used by different audiences. We also really focus on small groups and localized communications because we know that putting something just on the website is passive. We know that having a video out there might be useful, but it's not as good as personal one-to-one interaction. Especially at a small group meeting where people can ask questions and then share that information with their friends and their neighbors as well. As an example, so here are some of the activities we've done so far as an example of how we do that localized communication. Back at the beginning of September, we held a site team training. This is basically a training for little communication departments at each of our schools or departments. And so people all come together, we go through the information, and then as small groups like at any of our schools, that site team develops a communication plan for their audiences for their communication, because they know what events they might be able to attend, they know where and when their parents might need to get information. So that happened in early September, and they've been working on those plans since then. We've done a handful of news releases announcing the referendum, announcing the times when we had meetings and presentations as well. We've had about 17, let's see if I can get that number right, 17 sort of district-led small group meetings. Added to that then are all of the presentations for staff at the buildings, all of the presentations that building principals just took upon themselves to give to their audiences as well. So quite a few. I wouldn't doubt if it was 40 or 50 meetings that have been done. Let's see here. Also on social media, we've had posts, of course, consistently on Facebook and Twitter especially. I just looked at the analytics, and just on the district's Facebook page, we've had more than 8,000 impressions, and I think it was about 400 likes or other interactions on our posts. So people are seeing them, which is good. And then I was hoping to, we'll see if this pulls up, just show you the full communications plan as well. Here we go. There we go. So I'm not going to go through all of this by any means, but just wanted to give you an idea of all of the activities that are going on around communicating on this, if we can get it to scroll down. Oh, there we go. So this is the start of that list, and it goes to about number 60 before we actually get to the referendum vote. So quite a bit of activity going on, which has been good and certainly keeping us busy. So I mentioned the materials that we created. Among those materials are a single-page fact sheet just with all of the information, a sample ballot, which I'll show in just a second, that helps break down some of that confusing language. We also created bookmarks and stickers. Of course, we got the website. We've got a presentation that we standardized so that principals and other community leaders could present if they wanted to their audiences. And then, of course, the graphics just to give it a theme. Here's that sample ballot. It's maybe a little small in terms of being able to see, but you get a sense of how dense the language is on the ballot. We just try to call out pieces of the information and break it down and make it a little bit simpler to understand for people so they can see and better understand what's actually going to be out there. And there's more than just the ballot that's confusing. I mean, just the idea of revoking and replacing can be a confusing concept, so we try to create graphics that help explain that. So this is one of the graphics that we use to talk about the two levies going away and the new levy being put in place with that additional funding. So we do have a little less than 2 weeks left before Election Day, so site teams will continue their work. I sent out an update to site team leaders this week, just reminding them and asking them to double check with their plans and make sure that they're following up on everything. We do have a handful of social media posts, and we'll be sending out phone messages as well, just to remind people that Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. And speaking of, polls will be open that day from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. In-person and early voting has already started here at the district office. That's available from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. on weekdays, but all the way until 5 p.m. on the Monday before election. And people can also vote by mail and get all of that information on our website. And that is a quick overview of everything that's going on around the levy. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you very much. Board members, questions or comments? Director Schatz.
I don't have a question. I do have a comment. Aaron, I love the sample ballot graphic that called out the little pieces of that. That's been a really helpful graphic, well, for me to understand what's going on, but also to as a really helpful tool to be able to refer people to, so they really understood kind of what the highlights were and what they'd really be seeing on Election Day. So that's been a really helpful piece of information. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear.
Thank you. Questions or any other questions or comments?
I was going to say the same thing about the graph because it's confusing with revoking and replacing, and actually having the visual to kind of lay it out has been really great too.
Good.
So thank you.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you. Director Miller.
A couple or
Quick point clarification, so early voting, I know they can visit the offices here, you gave the hours on that, and by mail, you say, so they would have to send in requests for a ballot, which is sent back to them, then they fill out the ballot, then they send it back, correct?
Correct. Yep, it's a
And
two-step
then
process.
on the Tuesday, Election Day, will all normal polling stations be open, or is there a limited amount, since this is an off?
It's my understanding, and I may ask Jamie to correct me here if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that in Dakota County, all of the normal polling locations are the same. No, am I wrong about that?
Are you talking combined precincts? We have 7 combined precincts. So
I'm just saying for-
the precincts like they would in a normal general election.
Well, I'm basically saying, people that are traditionally used to voting every 4 years, would they be going to the same polling place that they traditionally have experienced?
They
So
may
heads up, they
not.
should probably check to where they're going.
Yes, that's a good point.
Okay.
They may have the same as they may have voted in a previous school district election, but it may be different than where they voted in the last presidential election, for instance.
Okay.
They can check that information either on the Secretary of State's website or on our website at, again, isd191.org/voting.
And then do we have any numbers around the amount of early voting that has occurred to date?
I don't have those at this point.
We don't have a count on it yet, or
I don't have an exact count.
have a rough number, or?
About 200.
Okay, good. Good to hear. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions? No. Well, Erin, you and your team of 3 have really done a great job of making sure that we're getting as much information out to our community as possible. And I concur with Director Schatz and Hallweger that I've received a lot of really positive feedback from people, both on the literature that you've created as well as the mailer that went out. Just people really appreciated the thoughtfulness and the amount of information that you were able to squeeze into a small space. So thank you for that, and thank you for this update.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, we will now go to committee reports, and we will start with Director Courier with the Policy Review Committee. You want to? Okay, so we'll start with Director Miller and the Legislative Committee while Director Courier pulls her report up.
Move quickly, because I don't have a lot to say.
Thank you.
The Legislative Committee did not meet since our last committee report meeting, but will meet on Tuesday, the 19th of November, where we will be entertaining Senator Clausen in attendance. So that's all.
Great, thank you. Director Courier?
Yes.
Yep, all right.
The Policy Review Committee met on October 8th. As a quick review, as a district, we review all policies every 3 to 5 years. Some policies by law require annual review. Our board subcommittee currently is reviewing the numerical 200 policies which relate to the school board. Later in the board's work this evening, under the consent agenda, we will likely approve the following policies as there were no changes made to them. 201, legal status of the school board. 203, operations of the school board governing rules. 203.1, school board procedures, rules of order. 203.5, school board meeting agenda. 203.6, consent agenda, and 204, school board meeting minutes. During the business portion of our meeting, we will review, possibly discuss, and approve 2 other 200 policies, which are 202, school board officers, and 203.2, order of the regular school board meeting. The committee did make some suggestions, and you'll see them in the agenda. We will continue to have our monthly meetings. However, we may only put policies with no changes on the agenda for our November and December meetings, given the complexity of our regular school board agendas for those 2 months. That concludes my report, unless there are some questions.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now we will turn to Director Schatz and the Negotiations Committee.
Negotiations are proceeding apace with, we've had 4 meetings now with the teachers union and have, I think, 5 more scheduled. So we continue to work towards a result for all parties.
Great, thank you. And finally, Student Performance and Achievement Committee of the Whole. We are essentially suspending those Committee of the Whole meetings as we continue to work through the facilities process. I think it would be a bit much to have staff pull together yet more information for us. So we will likely resume those sometime early in 2020. Do board members have any other reports for any other appointments or assignments? Director Courier.
Yes, I have a few. The Association of Metropolitan School Districts. There were two very interesting presentations at the October 4th AMSD meeting. The first was by Rachel Dahm, the 2020 Census Project Manager of the Minnesota Department of Administration. Two big takeaways from her presentation were, one, the hazards of an undercount, and two, curriculum resources available to schools. The biggest hazard of the undercount are preschoolers, especially in how that affects schools. The other presentation, entitled Overview of VOS Database Report, was by Nick Green, Property Tax Research Director for the Minnesota Department of Revenue. It was very technical, but interesting. Very technical. Both reports are on the amsd.org website. I encourage both my fellow board members and the public to check them out. So that was that report.
Okay.
I have an intermediate District 917 report. The regular meeting was held Tuesday, October 1st. District 917 is converting to MSBA's policy numbering system, so there were first readings of the following policies under the new system. 418, drug-free workplace, drug-free schools. 502, search of student lockers, desk, personal possessions, and student's person. Policy 520, student surveys, and Policy 531, Pledge of Allegiance. In 917, you can imagine how complex it is to have MSBA, their policies. So they don't have a committee like ours. Basically, it's administration trying to sift through their various programs and trying to make sure that the policies are general enough to fit their very specific programs and make sure that the policies fit their programming. New business items at that meeting included renewals for employee medical, dental, LTD, and life insurances. The other two business items were reviews of enrollment counts for the special education and decals programs. This morning, 917 held a superintendent board workshop. We heard from Valerie Doslin from Eatwall Consulting, who does advocacy work for intermediate school districts at the legislature. Other items discussed included career and technical education and how difficult it is to get instructors with appropriate licensure in order to use Perkins funding. Also discussed was the challenge of school district annual legal notices, given that Lilly newspapers have folded. Several of the 917 districts had them as their official paper of record. There was an overview of negotiations progress, especially in 917. Last, Superintendent Zuzik, Superintendent Battle, and I gave a report to the group about ISD 191's possible changes due to enrollment declines. ISD 191 houses several 917 programs. For example, at Gideon Pond, for at least the past 30 years, the 917 Elementary Deaf and Hard of Hearing program has resided there. Currently, 917 leases space for some of its programs. There are current discussions between the two administrations about space needs of 917 in our district. Currently, there are approximately 25 students from 917 districts that need placements. so they have a need for space. I know in the next couple weeks, due to our timeline, they will be working closely with us. That concludes my report, but don't be surprised if 917 appears in some of our upcoming discussions. So that concludes my report on 917.
Great report. Thank you very much, Director Courier. Any other reports? Director Schatz.
I have a report from the Burnsville Chamber Public Policy Committee. ISD 191 has received a statement of support for the upcoming levy from the Burnsville Chamber of Commerce. We are grateful for the continued community support for our district, especially from our partners such as the Chamber.
Great. Thank you. Any other reports? Yes.
Do you want school reports?
If you have a school report, yeah, please.
Yep. This week I was able to connect with one of my schools. I met with Principal Bomsta at Edward Neal School. As you know, Edward Neal has a new assignment for him, or it was a new assignment for him this school year. He has quickly settled into his new venue. We went through the site's 2019-20 plan. I continue to be amazed how thorough and technically solid each school's plans are. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. And next week, I will be meeting with Principal Nesvig of the Eagle Ridge Middle School. So I'm getting out there.
You're busy.
Yes.
That's great. All right. Any other reports? No? All right. Thank you all. With that, I will invite Brian Grissich, Assistant Superintendent, and Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services, to the podium. We will receive a facilities realignment update. Welcome both.
Thank you. And thank you again to Chair Alt, Superintendent Battle, and Board of Directors for this opportunity once again to address you, talking about our facilities realignment process and provide you with some updates this evening. Certainly you know some of the things that were coming from a topic perspective because of the discussion we had at our previous board meeting. But this evening we are, thank you, going to talk about some summaries from our focus groups and a lot of the participation and the themes that we've gathered over the last few weeks as a part of our process to gather feedback from our community. Take a little time to review the multiple timelines that we have going here. And as we'll talk, we've got timelines that are kind of, interwoven as we have multiple timelines for the different phases of this project that we are embarking on. Including some discussion about the potential for a boundaries process in the event that we continue to move in the direction of the consultant's recommendation of potentially closing sites. And then talk also about the reconfiguration of grades update that was a part of the consultant's recommendation as well. You okay? Sorry, there was confusion. I want to make sure I didn't have something wrong there. So just as hopefully you had a chance as board members to see some of the posters that were created as a part of our focus group. For those members that are potentially watching from home, all of those are also in board books, so people can look through those. Those are all documents that were created as a part of our process. We're going to talk about what those questions were and some of the themes from that process that was a part of our focus groups. Just talking a little bit about the stakeholder feedback that we had an opportunity to get. As you can see from that chart, we did have a significant amount of opportunities from our community, both with our focus group, community stakeholder investment, our multiple meetings with our staff members at our buildings throughout the district, student groups, members of our administrative team, and again, just a real concerted effort to have great engagement as a part of this process. And it was something that our consultant remarked about, that it's not typical in these processes to have this kind of involvement as he goes through community. So hopefully that's something he would be able to address as he speaks to us in a few weeks. But as we know, that's by design. And that was certainly something that was a part of this board's expectation, as well as that was the concurrence of our administrative team to make sure that our community had a voice in this process and multiple opportunities to do that. And again, hopefully this slide gives you an opportunity to see that that was a successful endeavor to engage a number of different people. I will say the attendance numbers, I tried to be conservative. I do think in a lot of situations they were probably higher, but obviously with that kind of environment, it's difficult sometimes to get an exact head count. The focus group themes, the one thing I would say is, especially at the time of the creation of this presentation, some of that information was still being compiled. If you'll notice, we have over 250 actually acclaimed, 275, nearly 300 feedback surveys just from our online form alone. So taking the time and the diligence to go through all of the comments and the remarks that are in there still is going to take some additional time. But what I'll show you this evening are some of the themes from those questions that came out as a part of the discussions. And as we go into that, I just remind everyone that maybe didn't come to our focus groups, especially again, people that might be watching, that those focus groups really had three major components to it. The first component was the consultant, Dr. Roger Werner, trying to help people understand the why behind his recommendation to close 2 elementaries and 1 middle school as he presented the data and the findings from his study. The second component of that was to gather some initial feedback from the attendees, and again, also from our internal stakeholder groups like our building meetings, where people were essentially asked 2 questions. One, based on the information and feedback, is there probable cause that the district should be considering closing 2 elementaries and 1 middle school? And then the second question was, if the district chose to embark, what would be the person who is filling out that form, their opinion as to what are the most critical factors that should go into that decision. So again, that was the second part, is getting that individualized feedback. The third component, which is what we're going to go in now, is the feedback from different groups where we engaged in World Cafe, tabletop discussions where teams of roughly 7 were asked a series of questions to give us their feelings about the process. If the district goes into this, essentially what are their fears, hopes, and desires coming out of this, so that those can be utilized by our administrative team. If we go down this road and implement, what are some things we need to weave into that implementation plan? So again, running through some of those themes, and again, hopefully people have an opportunity to read through those. Certainly people might develop their own themes, and how these things may be clustered might be somewhat unique, but as we go through this process, these are some of the themes that we saw. So the first question was, what are the feelings or thoughts that you have about the information learned today? And that was specific to the information from Dr. Werner's study. And certainly you see some of the themes in there. Class size certainly came up quite a bit, even in our discussions that evening, that we addressed some of those questions right there on the spot. Certainly people have varied opinions, feelings of scared and anxiousness and uncertainty about this process. Concerns about the perception of District 191, and I'll mention that again when we get to some of the responses from our student groups about the perception of their schools and District 191. Certainly desire for transparency matches what our commitments were as a part of our guiding change document, and what we're really looking for as a part of this process is ultimate transparency, which is again why again and again we would encourage people to go to our website for a lot of information, or to Board Book for seeing some of these slides as well. And again, there were some that would really indicate that people, again, the survey itself, the feedback that people receive, that I'm assuming Dr. Werner will have as a part of his presentation, will quantify people's feedback on was there compelling evidence that the district should be doing this. But the comments on the paper slides themselves generally did say people seem to understand why we're having this discussion. The second question, what additional thoughts and perspectives do you have about this decision or process? Themes were a little harder to come by with this one, in that they were a bit more singleton. There were certainly some comments about the shortened timeline, and a lot of discussion about what can be done to increase enrollment and why we're losing students to be in this position. And certainly, again, you'll see a theme that comes through a couple of times. Will programs be cut? Or in some cases, people were asking, if we're going to be more efficient, are there ways we can revisit programs that were previously cut and potentially add those back in? So again, not saying anything about the possibility of that, but really saying that comes through as a theme for some of the feedback. The third question that was for discussion, if the district does choose to close schools, what concerns or fears would you have about that process? And again, you'll see some of the themes about, will this encourage more students to leave our district to open enrollment? Loss of neighborhood schools, transportation and class impact, size of classes again comes up again in this particular area, and then worried about possible loss of friends and relationships. And one of the things we discussed, and I'll come back to this a little bit, but yesterday with our leadership team, in these themes from our tabletop discussions, it became apparent that people were talking about the concern of possible loss of friendships or relationships related to our students, but also pointing out we have to be cognizant that that comes to families as well as staff members as well, and people who might be concerned about those loss of friendships. And I think, many who have been parents, and I myself in my own experiences, the friendships of our children sometimes become the friendships of our families. And we may be doing things as families as opposed to just our kids happen to be sitting next to each other in class. And that fear of losing friendships can go to the PTOs that we currently have that might have a subtly different mix when sites are closed or boundary lines are potentially changed. The fourth question was, what would you or your child need for support, or what support would you need in the event that this goes down and is implemented? Transparency, regular access to information, again, another theme. Finding ways to highlight the positive opportunities. It's obviously something that we talked about with our guiding change document. What are the opportunities that exist? How is this, as opposed to deficit language, how is this really going to benefit district and our students and families? And then celebrations and open houses. And again, look for that as we get down to the next step of talking about some of the things our administrators are going to be doing about really bringing people together. And then the fifth question, last question, what do you believe to be are the greatest benefits and opportunities that could come from right-sizing our district? Again, there's that programs talking point again, where people are encouraging us to revisit programs that were previously reduced. Pleasing to see that third bullet point that talks about the opportunities that come from redrawing boundaries with an equity lens in mind. And again, that really, again, matches some of the commitments from the administrative team and things that I know that the board agrees with of what is that opportunity to make sure that our schools are balanced. And of course, efficient use of funds. Always exciting to hear from our students. And again, thanks for the suggestion, as I know that came up as a part of the discussion with the board to make sure that there was a concerted effort to get feedback from our students. Our middle school groupings were asked some focus group type questions, so you'll see their responses there. Fears or concerns they might have about school, transportation times, again, the next couple things about relationships, wanting to know about their teachers and the relationships they have with their teachers, as well as friendships. What would make the transition easier? You'll look at tours of schools or being able to schedule classes with their old friends. Transportation and teachers come up once again. The third question, what potential benefits could you see from your schools? Certainly, again, another advocacy for programming. Middle school sports, you'll see, came up in two spaces, question 1 as well as question 3. And then a acute opportunity there for that next bullet point, which was the opportunity to build and ease that transition into high school by meeting more people and having more friends. And I should have put that more kids equal more fun in quotes, because that was taken right off of one of the forums, because I thought that was pretty cool. Just the fact that our students are looking at the opportunity of having additional friendships and more kids around. Our high school responses, and again, I mentioned this earlier, it's interesting to highlight item 2, wanting to make sure that the school district has a good reputation and the concern that this will have an impact on it. It really matches. I was in a Avid 12 classroom. Ms. Waller, one of our high school teachers, invited me in to talk to her Avid class, and during kind of a Q&A portion, one of the students asked, my opinion of what I hear, what do students outside of Burnsville think of Burnsville High School? So the perception of this school district and their school is important to our students, and so I think it's important to note that. So kind of what the next steps, and I'll talk about this from a timeline perspective in a little bit, but certainly this is something that the expectation is that we continue to circle back to. We look at those themes. We've heard from our community. We've heard from our students. We've heard from our families as to what's important to them as we go down this road, if we're implementing. And so how might we use those things with our principals? And certainly we are currently working with our principals to develop multiple ways to communicate and support families based specifically on this feedback. And shortly here, we'll talk a little more about some of the specifics that go with that. Before going into just some of those timeline things, just kind of one tie out of those focus groups or just some general reflections of that process and what we've done to date. And certainly this is an ongoing process, so there'll be an opportunity, I'm sure, to look at it in its totality once this has completed. But we did learn quickly after the first night when we had the Eagle Ridge focus group that people were needing to see maps. They wanted to see visuals of our districts. As some of the questions, even on the feedback form, one of the items for criteria were the geographic location of sites, be that on our boundaries or close to one another. And so the need for the visuals, we came obviously to the future focus groups with maps. That evening, we were able to project an image of the district boundaries for those who were there, but it was certainly much easier for people to see printed copies in front of them. Certainly, we've got to be cognizant of our projectors. We had great attendance. It kind of ties in with the second bullet point. The attendance in the space, we've got to be prepared to adapt. But we did run into the second night with Metcalf that we just had a projector that wasn't large enough for people to see. And so it did create I think, a little bit of confusion in seeing the slides and the data. I think our consultant did a nice job trying to read off everything and had to slow it down, but I do think that there's a little lost in the numbers and the translation. Again, for those people who might watch and would have been here that night, they were certainly reminded too of all that information came directly from the full study, which is on our website. And then certainly childcare. We just got to continue to review that. Childcare became very popular, and I think that's a great opportunity. I mean, families were coming out, but we've just, I think, have to have a little more detailed plan to that. I really appreciate the work of our principals and those who came to volunteer. Nothing against them. I just think they needed more support, and I think we have to realize that kids like to move, and we've got to have an opportunity maybe to do some of that too. So again, from a timeline perspective, what you're going to see here are timelines. There's, like I said at the kind of the beginning, there's multiple timelines here. You're going to see them kind of pulled apart. But as we've been working, we've continued to develop timelines that have these things layered, maybe, multicolored layered timelines, so we can see things as they go also in a sequential way, as opposed to right now, I'm going to show you things that are kind of pulled apart, where you've got a timeline for decision making, some timeline for implementation items, timeline for boundaries, and then a timeline for some of the communication pieces. So just realize this is, it's an incredibly organized process, but there are things that are just kind of separated out for the simplicity of being able to work with various groups or communicate in various ways. And so this next timeline is really, again, what you've already seen, what's coming up over the next month from a decision-making perspective. The week of November 4th, preparing those recommendations, and again, that's work still with the consultant. November 14th, that consultant will be here to address the board and present their findings, specifically identifying the sites that the process would recommend be the closing of 2 elementaries and 1 middle school. The potential for a public hearing on December 4th, again, that's on the schedule, certainly tentative and pending the board approving to add that to the schedule. And then December 12th, the potential actual date when the board would take action on the recommendation by the consultant to close the identified schools. This next set of timelines is, again, at the time of this kind of extreme draft form. This was actually just shared for the first time with our principals on Wednesday. Want to send a special note of thanks to Erica Nesvig, who I'm assuming is still here, and Christine Black. Christine and Erica, as well as Dave Helke, are 3 principal representatives that work with myself, Stephanie White, and Amina Oftedal, our CISA directors, as a part of a team that comes together on a monthly, sometimes twice a month basis to discuss issues of leadership, things that relate to our principals, to make sure that we're engaging our principals as a part of our decision-making practices. Coming out of that, they help support the development of some key messages that I'm going to explain here. So it really is the vision and the perspectives of our practicing principals that goes into this communication plan. So really appreciate, we have some talented principals, and I appreciate their inclusion as a part of this process. So what we're looking at here is November 6th. What we're looking at there is principals meeting with their teams, their staff in their buildings, knowing that there are also some of our employee groups that might not be working that day. That is a kind of a professional day that they'd be working. There may be other meetings during that week to ensure that it's not just given to teachers, but it is teachers and cooks and custodians and secretaries and EAs, all of whom, again, are stakeholders in our buildings. And right now, what we're looking for is leadership within our principals and within all of our staff members. Knowing that what we're going into here is a challenging decision, we've really got to be prepared for how we're going to support our students and our families, how we're going to see the opportunities, and keep us looking forward to what this does for our ability to offer the best services and programs for our students. And so what they're going to do on November 6th is really talk about the timeline, as well as talk about the important role that we're going to play in supporting those stakeholders in our community. So again, Erica, Christine helped developed a draft for the principals, shared that with them yesterday for what that presentation would look like to share those messages. November 15th, so again, remember from the timeline before, November 14th is when the consultant is here to share with the board the identified sites. November 15th, our building principals will be meeting with their sites again, certainly with a couple of different messages. Some of our sites will have been potentially identified for closure, others would not. I know the slide says here that principals of sites being closed would meet with respective staff, but as we discussed with our team yesterday, all of our principals will be meeting with their staff. There's a message for those that have been identified for closure because they know that there's a lot of changes coming, but there's still also that message for everyone else that the impact can still be faced by everyone, whether they're inviting new students in or those boundary changes that could happen that could end up moving students across sites even that weren't closed, it's an important message that we prepare ourselves for. There's more information coming. There would also be an all-district message sent out by Dr. Battle to all of our families to help communicate what's been going on and what was presented to the board on November 14th as well. And then the week of November 18th, that's when our principals would hold meetings for the families of those sites that have been identified for closure, to again help people understand processes, timelines, what things are coming forward, and what to expect in the future ahead. One other note, when I look up at the numbers, November 6th timing, it's of note that is also the week of conferences. And so again, those messages and those key things are strategic as a part of that week, not just because it's the week before the decision is made, but also that is an opportunity to prepare our teachers and our staff for those conversations individually with families that are coming in for conferences. And so again, knowing that those families are coming in and you've got those contact points, giving people the opportunity and the talking points is timely in that regard as well. Then as we look into January, February, and April, what you'll notice here are just a lot of activities. And again, this is, like many of our timelines, going to need to be fluid as we get more information, as we have better planning. This is really about relationships. When you look at January, after sites have been identified, potentially action taken to close sites, how do we start to bring together families like PTOs to educate as well as talk about what support can PTOs have as we plan additional opportunities to come together into the spring? February, certainly we would hope at that point principals have been identified as to what sites they would be at in the event that there is the need to move some of our principals around, which certainly we anticipate. Can they go in and start working and interacting with students? Can they start having principal nights at school sites to start inviting families in and provide information? Certainly working into April when we would know that we would have staff potentially identified who would be moving around to different sites, starting to lead planning with families and students. Hosting open houses, you notice that from our students about talking about tours of the school. You notice that from families that talked about open houses and the feedback. What do those opportunities look like in April or again in spring as the timing fits? And then the next slide is again some of the things you've seen before from that implementation and refinement strategy. I won't go through all of them, but you'll see themes in there like how that fits into our budget adjustment process, how that fits into the boundary adjustments that Lisa Ryder is going to talk about here momentarily, staffing decisions that need to be made and what those look like within those timelines. And then just one other item of note on the slide, I realize it says in April and May that we talk about what are we going to do with buildings closures. But again, as this is fluid, I know that that's also something that will be moved up much sooner. That discussion will be initiated likely in January. So again, it's a very organized, but we also have to realize the need to adapt. We'll make the decision and develop the timelines with the information we have and the best information we have, and we will absolutely adapt and change things as priorities or other information tells us we should do things in a slightly different order. And then I know Lisa's going to talk at this point about some boundary items.
Thank you, Brian. As we work through the process of the facility decision being disclosed and then that is contemplated by the board, we will then begin to turn our attention more towards boundary adjustments. And once that decision then is made regarding the facility closures, the addressing of those boundaries will likely need to be at both levels of middle schools as well as elementary schools. So as we take a look at this, the first thing we're going to want to do is review the recommendations and decision on the school closures. And we would look towards our guiding change document for some guidance with regard to what is the unacceptable means as well as what is the results we're looking for. And so as we do take a look at that, I just want to pull this up and just for the benefit of those that are viewing. The guiding change document is on Unchanged with regard to the middle and the last column, which is the unacceptable means and the results. So I'll pull that up in a little bit then when we get, as Brian's doing his presentation, we'll see about that. With regard to the guiding change document, the one thing that has been changed on it is the The first column is identifying the fact that we have some known current realities for us. Our boundaries haven't been changed in 20 years. We have non-contiguous boundaries for attendance related to the area of attendance for a particular school, particularly at the elementary level. So do we address those things at this point in time? Not to mention the fact that we must keep the equity and the balance in mind with regard to our population and demographics across our schools as a whole. So all of that which we have been working through with regard to the facility closing and the expectations around those results and the unacceptable means is unchanged moving forward. We are continuing with everything about that being the same. What we're just doing is focusing the current realities based on just that which is boundaries as we look at that guiding change document. It is the timeline and the process that we would be using is also very similar as far as the approach. And so I'd like to speak a little bit about that. We believe that we will follow that similar approach, and in the process of developing the timeline, we will be sure to include the strong community engagement as we have seen done with the closing of the facilities process. The timeline that is being brought forward, will have 3 phases. The boundary design team and stakeholder voice will take place in the months of December and January. The choice making, which is the board discussion and decision, would take place in January and February, with the implementation and refinement, much of which Brian's already alluded to, will continue then from February through August. We've seen this diagram before, and we're using this because it is the framework of what our decision making will be around the boundary changes as well. There is a need for stakeholder voice and input. At the same time, we need a design team that's going to do the legwork and the details of creating and identifying scenarios that might work at the various levels, whether it's middle school or elementary. That's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of back and forth with regard to that. So we want to make sure that we're hearing the voice from our families. As we take a look at the middle part of that slide, you see that the choice making is the governance and a little bit of that management as well, but mostly the governance there for the choice making happening at the board level. Once we reach the implementation, there's always going to be a need for refinement to that process, and so there will be always that continuous review and improvement upon that as we work through. I do want to point out that this diagram and the guiding change framework that you see here, where you take a look at your current reality and what is the unacceptable means and then what is the results, all of that is something that we use in these large decisions because it does help for people to really understand where are they in that whole process and how does this all fit together. So with that, then I'll turn that back over to Brian.
Yep, so as we've said a few times before, there were multiple recommendations that the consultant gave as a part of their study. And as it relates to facilities, there was the recommendation to close 2 elementaries, 1 middle school that we've been talking about quite a bit and we talked about already this evening. There was a recommendation to close and sell the Diamond Head Education Center. That was discussed at the last board meeting with some updates and is still a process coming down the road. And then there was a recommendation that we reconfigure our grade levels from the pre-K 5 sites to the pre-K 2 and the 3-5 buildings. And so what this next series of slides really is to share with you the review of the administrative team related to this particular piece or recommendation and give you an idea of the response from that admin team towards that recommendation. Just want to note as we go through these slides, I appreciate the work of Amina Oftedal and the CISA department. They really led and facilitated the research of this process as well as facilitating the conversation with the leadership team. She would have liked to have been here to give this presentation, but she is traveling back from CPSS training. So again, I feel comfortable in presenting this, having been a part of those conversations, but certainly she is the expert behind this and would really be the one who would be able to speak to a lot of the research that I'm going to summarize for you. From the grade configuration recommendation, again, as I mentioned, the CISA team did help support the conversation and the research behind this. Certainly as we go into it, there's an acknowledgement off the top that this, as a proposal, would certainly have some financial efficiencies as a part of it. But as was discussed many times through our guiding change document, what we really wanted to do as an administrative team is make sure that we're focused on the educational impact that a move like this would have and make sure that we're always driving towards student achievement as our highest priority. And so that's the lens really by which you'll see the research engages. And so again, if you click on that link, you'll see an actual summary document of both the next few slides of summary as well as the research studies that were utilized as a part of this process. But as a quick summary, the research would suggest that the grade spans that have a higher academic achievement impact are larger, wider grade spans. So again, as an example, pre-K-8 would be a larger grade span comparatively to pre-K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, or something like that. Larger grade spans have a higher academic achievement, but also noting that pre-K2 grade spans recommend in benefits from a social emotional learning perspective. A little more detail as it comes into that, though, as to why. Why do they find within the research that those larger grade spans are academically more beneficial? It really comes down to transitions and the regression that happens during times and points of transition. So the first couple of bullet points, greater magnitude of change results in overall negative impacts, and academic performance often dips the first year following a transition. 2 comments in that. One is the proposed transition suggests putting a transition in grade 3. We obviously right now have one in grade 6 and in grade 9, and based on the research, you would expect an overall performance dip at those points in transition. Interestingly, difficult times sometimes for transition as we think about middle level and high school and the critical importance of investing in those transitions. But adding that additional transition in 3rd grade, which we also know from a research perspective that suggests, as an example, the critical importance of 3rd grade when it comes down to reading. And statistically, that students who are not on track for grade level reading at the end of 3rd grade are unlikely to ever be on track at reading at grade level. So again, having a potential academic regression in a critical year is a bit difficult to understand and palate. Just a quick note there, when you talk about magnitude, greater magnitude, definition of that is the scope or number of factors in change. So examples of those would be changing buildings, new teacher principals, changes in behavioral expectations, the number of transitions during the school day, different schedules. The more of those things or items thrown in, the greater the magnitude of the change. And again, some additional things in there that talk very similarly about that impact. The next slide really puts those kind of into a side-by-side, wider grade spans like that pre-K-8 versus smaller grade spans. Again, you'll see some things about cost effectiveness and the ability to focus on developmental needs on the smaller grade spans. But again, you talk about reducing transitions and thereby having lasting positive academic impact on the wider grade spans component. So again, kind of in summary, the process really was a literary review, which really did focus on elementary here because that is the focus of the recommendation, was taking that for our elementary sites. Literature review, as well as sharing that with our principals and leadership, them engaging and answering some questions and really synthesizing some of that feedback, having looked through that summary. And then also review of other school districts. It was also of note, and I know that was brought up by Vice Chair Miller last time through, of saying, what do other districts do? Ms. Ofdahl and her team did a review of the MDE sites for other districts that would have configurations like this. The thing to note is many of those are unlike District 191, and some of the findings, particularly the negative academic impacts, are amplified for populations with larger students of color, as well as populations of low socioeconomic status, amplify the negative impacts of transitions. But in looking through those, a lot of the sites that have this also have that configuration in either the same building or adjacent sites, which again starts to limit the magnitude of some of those transitions when those sites are right next door to each other. We are also talking about many districts that are unlike District 191. I'm looking at a series of districts that have populations of about 2,000 to 3,000 students, significantly different demographic background than those of 191. And again, something we could certainly make available if that's of interest to board members as to what those districts are. So again, just in summary with that, the recommendation of the administrative team, considering that magnitude and the change related to facilities, that our current configuration would best serve the students in the district and thereby would recommend against accepting that particular piece of the consultant's recommendations. The last piece we have as far as for our presentation, just to remind the board and the public that certainly pending board action, which would come after hearing the proposal next board meeting from the consultant of a potential public hearing December 4th for the public to weigh in on what those recommendations would be. And that concludes our presentation.
Excuse me. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Assistant Superintendent Gersich. It certainly is important for both the board and our community to absorb the information that you and your team are looking at and gathering. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again on behalf of the school board, it is our responsibility to be transparent as a district. And that's what this process is all about, and that's what all of us seek in making sure that we are sharing as much information as we can. So basically, recapping briefly the timeline, between now and December, school closures will be our focus. Starting in January, we'll be talking about, the board will turn its discussions to boundary discussions, as well as facilities usage, including what our wishes might be in terms of using, repurposing the 2 empty elementary schools and the 1 empty middle school, in addition to leveraging other facilities as well. With that, I will open it up for comments and questions. Director Schatz.
There's a lot going on. I have a couple questions about just about the grade reconfiguration piece of this. The first question would be do you know what the consultants, what their recommendation was based on to recommend the pre-K to 2, 3 to 5? I mean, why was that? On what did they base that recommendation?
Finances. You would find staffing efficiencies by doing that. Similar to closing sites and consolidating, we would be able to not have some of those potential imbalances in class sizes. So it really is staffing efficiencies that would result from that configuration.
Okay, thank you. That was my guess, but I appreciate that. So if K through 8 is the least disruptive ideal model for students, and if I'm understanding what your explanation of this highest positive long-term impact on academic achievement for all students. So are there schools with districts with the PK to 8 model? You said there were a few with the PK to 2 and the 3 to 5 grade model. Are there districts with this PK to 8 model?
I mean, I know that there are districts with the PK 8 model, for sure. It's just whether or not those districts are the size of District 191 or have the same. I don't know the answer to that. I do believe that Ms. Oftedal did have some look at that, but the focus really here was on responding to the consultant's recommendation, which is why some of the other ideas that have come up through the process even were not vetted through this particular research. But I don't have the names of districts, but we could certainly look at that and find that out. Amina may, because I do believe she did have some of that, but.
Okay, okay, sorry, Lisa, go back one, just where you were there. But it does also say here that the PK to 2 grade span has many benefits in social emotional, which seems to contradict a little bit the findings that the K to 8 is the ideal, model for a large grade span or for a grade span. This sounds like PK to 2 does have some benefits.
Social emotional benefits for sure, but again, if you notice, the first one talks about academic benefits versus the social emotional benefits. And I think having good social emotional will lend itself, again, statistically to academics, I think that's the delineation between the two. Straight academic, because again, it might have benefits to social emotional during that grade span, but it's the transitions that happen afterwards that I believe result in the regression from an academic perspective.
Okay, so this piece here, the PK to 2 is just in social emotional learning, not
Correct.
academic. But the transitions piece results in the academic regression, and there's not a comment on the social emotional impact of the transition.
I don't have that, no.
Okay.
I don't know if that existed within the research, because again, I think Amina and her team are the experts within that.
Okay.
But I don't have that as far as from the PKA perspective.
Okay, and can you, summarize all the research in this area, Brian, and just tell us, nice, executive summary of all the research in this area. That'd be great. I'm just kidding.
Yes, no, yeah.
So
I think that's where the question would come from, is that particular section of the slides.
brief synopsis.
Yep.
So I think what we will do in the interest of focused conversation and time is, since Director Schatz started us off with the grade span conversation, why don't we stick with that? And board members that have questions about grade span, we can focus on those now, and then we can go to questions on the other elements after that, once we've exhausted those questions. Does that sound fair to everybody? Yep, okay. So any other questions on grade span or comments? Director Miller.
All right, so I'm going to, I think, expand a little bit on what Director Schatz was asking there. So going back, so the comparison was set to the PK8, but we're not a PK8, we're PK5. Are we to make the assumption that because, as it said here, long-term impact is highest positive long-term impact PK8, that therefore PK5 also is higher than, say, suggested than the PK2 alternative?
Correct. I think PK8 is the kind of widest grade span that exists. I guess there could theoretically be PK12 in a really small district.
We're assuming it's a scale, and it gets less as the further you go down the scale.
That's correct.
Okay. I guess some of the questions I had around this, well, first of all, later on then you state that there were very few districts that have tried this model. And I'm going to make an assumption, I can be corrected on this if necessary later, but I'm going to make an assumption that the districts that did try this model or are trying this model did it out of some sort of necessity, such as we found ourselves in, rather than just creativity. So they may have already had some challenges in their district, is what I'm suggesting, versus a more stable, chugging along just fine in a PK5 or PK8 environment. So, and again, I'm fine to be challenged on that if that's possible, but nevertheless, it is directly stated there's a limited amount of districts that are at the doing this model, and so I'm a little concerned that we're making apples to apples comparison if we have a limited set on one side of the comparison and basically the rest of the state on the other side of the comparison. And then if I understood right, the largest driver of the concern around academic achievement is this issue around transition and change. I understand that, I hear that, but I will point out that students go through change grade by grade. They go to different classrooms, they go to different teachers. I understand they're not as dramatic as going to a different building, but there is change that occurs along the way. So I guess that's it. I just clarify a couple of those things.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions on grade span? Director Hume, sorry.
It's more of a comment, I guess. But I appreciated getting this report tonight, so thank you. I've been wondering a lot about myself about the K2, 3, 5, and what that transition would mean academically for the students. So I appreciate the work that has gone into this, and it makes it's helpful to understand a little bit more about the academic transitions and how difficult that can be if they're changing schools every 2 or 3 years, as opposed to maybe you go to the same school for 6 years and then you start going to those transitions. So I appreciate that, and I just want to say thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I'm sorry. No, okay. So I just had a comment really in terms of thinking about how best to serve all of our students, and thinking about your comments on the magnitude of change and understanding the great variety of needs that our students bring to us. So we know that about 17% of our students are English language learners. We know that slightly over half of our students are free and reduced lunch. We have really a true responsibility to our special education students. And when I think about the impact on learning that having with that the recommendation would introduce into the system. I just wonder if it's, penny wise, pound foolish. That there are times when, yes, we do have some difficult, we have some challenges financially, and at the end of the day, we're here to serve our students. I guess the question is really understanding that the magnitude of the changes and the transitions, what is going to be best for our students. And we haven't seen, any financial impact, really, a statement on financial impact as far as what the difference between the two grade spans might be. So that's just kind of what I've been thinking about. All right, turning to the other elements of the presentation. Would anyone else? Yes, Director Hallweger.
I had a question about the facilities, the meetings, community meetings, and the feedback that you got from that. Going around and reading the posters that are on the wall here, there are, like you said, a lot of common themes, but there are a lot of questions on those papers that we have answers to, and we kind of know what's going on with that. How is that going to be provided to the parents of the students affected? How are they going to get all their information when on those questions that we kind of already have answers to?
Yeah, so a couple things. One would be, obviously, we mentioned the fact that principals would be inviting families in and potentially doing some Q&A. And I think when that becomes more and more real, those messages will become, I think more and more obvious that people are going to be looking for those answers and going to their principals. Another piece is, again, thanks to Aaron and his team, have created and are starting to put out some Q&A, FAQs, frequently asked questions, for our website, so that those can be up, as well as push out communications and newsletters coming out, press release with frequently asked questions. So already in development, and appreciate the drafts that he's been putting out over the last few days just in preparation for this, as well as some of those common questions like what's going to happen to class size, getting those answers out there, because we do have some suggestions and ideas and comments about what that should do to class size, because I think there was kind of a common misunderstanding that we would close sites and just jam students into existing classrooms, taking class sizes from 25 to 40. Well, that's simply not the case. We anticipate that the average class size formula utilized would be the same, and what this do is give us an opportunity to better balance without having those areas where we have discrepancies in higher class sizes versus lower. We should be able to balance them better by concentrating our student populations. So I think those are a few of the means, from our principals to the frequently asked questions to the push out email communications and the press releases that are being created, a lot based on those frequently asked questions.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, thank you. Any other questions? Director Miller.
Actually, I only have one question, more than a bunch of comments. First of all, I did attend a number of these community discussions, and I think you guys did an excellent job. I not only attended them, I moved around and listened to most of the tables, and you guys did an excellent job. And I'm really want to stress how thorough this board has attempted to be in, and Dr. Battle's team on this, but in involving our community. I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to hear every voice out there, but we've done as much, I think, as possible, given the time frame and the environment. I think you've done a great job summarizing many of the themes. I wanted to, you just mentioned, took one of the things I was going to mention about the class size. I heard that quite often, and at first it kind of surprised me, but so I think it's adamantly important that we re-stress this point, that this board has a directive on the so-called average classroom size number, and it's a complicated process. I understand there's outliers, and people see classroom sizes that are slightly bigger and slightly smaller throughout their experience in the district. That is not changing with this process one bit. And at first, I was really confused. Why are we even talking about classroom size? And then I realized, as you said, people thought, well, you just have to jam more into an existing classroom, and it's simply just not the case. So I want to be very, very clear about that. Our directive on the classrooms, the teacher to pupil ratio has not changed at all and will remain the same after this process. I have I guess I do have a question about, and luckily Stacy's here, so he can then possibly swing this on the teachers as it came up. If we're closing school A and moving most of those kids to B per se, the teacher alignment, does that become, with our contractual obligations and such, how does that work? I mean, does that classroom just assume that we're going to take that whole classroom and the teacher with it? Or does that become an open sort of discussion then with moving teachers around and such?
Well, part of it is, it goes back to the conversation around the boundaries.
Yeah.
It's not just going to be moving
I understand.
one place to the other.
Yep.
So once we have the boundaries decision made, and I know what the enrollment of a building is going to be, that's when we'll use our parameters that you'd mentioned prior to then say this is how many FTEs that building will need and how many they'll need per grade. At that point, we'll follow our contract language as far as we may have some reductions based upon enrollment as far as our teaching staff. And then we'll have to follow our contract to what that might look like with either our probationary teachers or even some of our continuing contract teachers. And then from there, then we backfill with the teachers at the buildings that are being displaced, would then fill in those gaps where our needs are.
Thank you. And I think what's important to be said here is that as much as we want to, I think the public needs to understand that, you know, if even though the majority of their class might have been moved to another building, they may not end up with the same teacher that they had anticipated having, and that there are many factors that go into this consideration set. So I mean, we just have to be very clear about that. And actually, that bleeds into one of my other points I want to make. I believe some point, Brian, you said impact may be felt by everyone. I want to say impact will be felt by everyone in this district. And we talked a little bit about boundaries. That possibly will be where more impact comes into play. And I want to be really clear in communicating that to the public. Impact is going to be felt by everybody. There is a very real scenario where a school is closed. It is not your neighborhood school, and your child might be going to a different school than they were, just simply because of the realignment of boundaries. So in one way or another, whether it's kids coming in, kids going out, whatever, impact will be felt by every member of this community. So I think it's important everybody understands that. And just this is more the January, April down the road thing, and just an offhand throw out there. As we start absorbing all this impact and new people are coming together, new families are meeting each other and stuff, I'm just suggesting a consideration that we maybe look at new identities for some of our schools. And I'm not talking about changing the names on the outside of the schools, but I know all the schools have tigers, hornets, things like that, and identities that go with that and stuff. And as an example, in my personal experience, the Apple Valley Eagles and the Burnsville Blaze youth hockey programs recently co-opted a couple of years ago, and they're now called the Firehawks, a clever combination of Blaze and Eagles. So just keep that in the back. That's been very successful, so just keep that in the back of your mind. So I guess that's it for the moment.
Great. Any other questions? I guess we're on the focus group process at this point.
Can I ask just a clarifying
Yes,
question?
Director
This was,
Chester.
what was presented today was more or less a compilation of all the different focus groups, but there's all these feedback forms, and that is what is going to be presented at the next board meeting in terms of the results and themes from the feedback forms?
Yeah, so at the next board meeting, the consultant would be here presenting their recommendation. I did have an opportunity to meet with him earlier this week just to talk through a little bit about what that would look like. And it would be my understanding that there would be, maybe not in its totality, but results from that feedback that he would be expressing, including What was the feedback on the question related to, is there probable cause for the district to do this?
Yeah.
As well as what was learned and utilized as a part of the community feedback on what they believed would be the criteria that should go into the decision if the district does that. So I have the understanding and expectation that those components would have some data to them to quantify what the results were.
Yep, but that wasn't part of what was provided in terms of the synopsis of tonight's meeting. It was
Correct.
just the comments from the focus groups, the papers.
That's correct.
Yep.
As far as that piece and how that's going to be utilized, I saw that it really is the consultant's role to incorporate that into the recommendation, and that is why that was omitted from this presentation, because I'm leaving that for him to explain as a part of the results.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, I have a couple. When you were talking about principals connecting with families, and there was a slide that mentioned, oh, in fact, we're on it, PTO boards getting together. I imagine that we're not going to be that prescriptive and specific because we know that each of our schools have a variety of ways of engaging our parents, and they have different parent groups, whether it's in the school or actually going out into the community. Do you expect that both in school and getting out in the community is going to be part of this process as far as connecting with families?
Could you just clarify that question? I'm not sure if I follow that as far as in school and out of school. I mean,
So-
specific to the PTOs?
Well, so in terms of educating families
Yep.
about the process, there are meetings that we have in our schools with families when they happen to be there. I know that there are schools that go out to where the community, the neighborhoods where our families live, to connect with the families where they are.
Yep. I would absolutely see our sites doing both, coming into the schools as well as going out to the sites, as many of them do right now naturally as a part of what they do.
Okay.
So I would say absolutely many of those successful ways that our principals have engaged families would absolutely be a part of this process. And I think when you look at January with PTOs, part of that is bringing in some parents as a part of finding out what can we do and what can this look like. It also addresses something where I know Lisa would be engaged in this part of the process as well. One of the immediate questions that came up from some people is what happens to PTO funds and how do those things get delineated? And I think that's going to be of concern to people. What happens to items that PTOs gave to sites? So I think engaging PTOs, because we know there's going to be some specific things that they're going to engage in like that, but also just as a reflection of maybe not the formality of the PTO by name, but how can we engage parents as a part of the process of developing some of these things, much like we engage our principals in the process of developing the key messages that will go out to families.
Okay. And I imagine there will be another type of form for the next phase of the process online for families to complete.
I would assume that
Yeah.
all of those things that have been successful as a part of this process in generating feedback would be cycled through the various timelines and processes that are going to be coming forward.
Okay. Let me just look to see what other questions I have. So I guess there were two more questions. In the feedback forms, I really appreciated having the feedback forms that we have posted here, both posted physically, but also available in board books so that folks can go out and look at them in their own spare time and see what it is that our families have been saying. And there's a concern, one of the themes, of course, was, what are we doing with our empty schools? And I feel compelled to say that I don't recall any, the consultant or any of staff or a board member mention selling off either of the two elementary schools or the middle school. Now, that's up to this point. Who knows what might happen after today? But I think generally there's a recognition that enrollment ebbs and flows, and we need to be forward-thinking as a board in terms of where we are right now and what our needs might be 20, 30, 40 years out. So I wanted to make that comment. And taking to heart comments about rumors and gossip and transparency, I kind of see gossip and transparency as the opposite sides of the same coin, where, you know, if you have a question and you're a community member, you're a family member, please ask it, because we have all this information. Dr. Hallwiger, you had pointed out that there are things that we know because we've been in the process that our families might not know. But simply, people need to connect with their principal. They need to email Assistant Superintendent Gersich, Dr. Battle. Please ask the questions, because simply because you don't have an answer to your question probably means that it hasn't been asked of us yet. And it could very well be a very valuable question for us to think about in this process. So let's really, everybody connecting. You know, communication is a two-way street. We need to hear from our community in terms of, you know, what are you hearing? What concerns do you have? And then we can help share out the information. So that was really important to me as well. Are there any other popcorn topics that board members have questions on that haven't been covered already? No? Yoda, did you, you have been quiet this evening. Can I put you on the spot? And do you have thoughts that you would like to share?
I actually did have a question about the middle school focus groups. How did you pick which students participated in those groups?
So that was something that I left to our principals that may have looked differently. I don't know if one of our middle school principals happened to be here tonight. Maybe they'd like to share their thoughts and perspectives.
I think we did it different ways. Some of us took like our student councils. I just went into a couple of 8th grade classrooms. So I had a mixture of kids, some of our peer leader groups. And so we tried to get a variety of students.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, Director Miller.
I just want to reinforce the point you were just making, Chair Alt. We do not have all the answers in this process. So, and you were specifically speaking to the community, but I want to speak to all of the stakeholders, our teachers, our staff members, anybody. These decisions have not been made, and we need the input and any questions, because questions often generate interesting thoughts about well, we hadn't thought about that. This literally came up last evening, meeting with a group of teachers and talking about things, other issues, and then brought up the point of transition and the time involved. And I said, you know what, that is fantastic information. We need that feedback. We're listening. We want to hear it, because, you know, in the mix of everything as we're moving quickly forward, sometimes some of these things get overlooked. PTO dollars, those kind of things. So we need all that feedback. Please, please, everybody, don't hesitate to bring up a question. That we need to hear it.
All right. We are all in this together, and we need to come together and make ourselves stronger coming out of this process. Thank you both very much. Brian, thanks again. You've put a lot of time and effort in, and this has been a really great report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Turning to the business portion of our meeting and our consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. In the event a board member wishes to discuss an item, that item will be moved for separate consideration. Are there items that any board members would like to remove for separate consideration? I have one. I would like to remove number 8. Approve scheduling a special board workshop on October 30th, 2019, just for a little discussion around that. So that I will take a motion to approve the consent agenda. Are there any other questions, discussion? Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
So moved.
Moved by Director Miller, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Courier. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. New business, turning to our first new business item of approving scheduling a special board workshop on October 30th, 2019. I just wanted to bring this up specifically because, as Director Courier alluded to in her report earlier tonight, we are having conversations about how best to serve our special ed students and in our partnership with 917. And staff continues to work to pull information together so that we can receive information on both of those topics next week in a workshop. And I wanted to make that make our community aware that we are receiving more information. Hopefully folks who are interested will join us. And the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve scheduling a special board workshop on Wednesday, October 30th at 6 p.m. at Diamond Head Education Center, 200 West Burnsville Parkway, Burnsville, for a report on special education. I will take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Courier. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the recommendation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the motion carries. Thank you. Next, we'll invite Guillaume Peck, our athletic director, to the podium. We are being asked to approve the cooperative sponsorship in Nordic ski between Burnsville High School and Shakopee High School. Welcome and thank you for waiting.
Thank you. So if I could potentially clump the Nordic and Alpine together, which is number 2 as well under new business, those are...
We'll keep them separate.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
So there's been a long-standing cooperative sponsorship between Shakopee and Burnsville, with some changes in Minnesota State High School League bylaw, with cooperative sponsorships continuing on into the postseason. Unknowingly by myself and the new activities director at Shakopee, those cooperative sponsorships have been dissolved. And so we're just sort of trying to correct the paperwork with the high school league to make sure that we're in compliance with our cooperative sponsorship.
Awesome. All right, let's pull up, make sure we've got the recommendation. All right, the recommendation has been read. I will take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Miller. Questions or discussion?
I have a question.
Yes, Director Courier.
The recommendation is that we approve the cooperative sponsorship. Now, if they've been dissolved, what does this do?
Can you say more, just so I can make sure I'm understanding what you're asking?
We had this relationship before.
Correct.
But the Minnesota State High School League dissolved them.
Yep. So
what does this do?
So it essentially reinstitutes the cooperative sponsorship. Prior to the rule change, cooperative sponsorships were regular season only. And so once you got to sections, then you had to essentially participate at your own school. And so what that did essentially with cooperative sponsorships on swim teams was it split up relay teams and forced one child to swim by themselves as their own high school. And so they changed the rule to allow cooperative sponsorships continue in onto sections. So
I get it.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, those in favor of approving the recommendation, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I'll read the recommendation that the Board of Education approves the cooperative sponsorship in alpine ski between Burnsville High School and Shakopee High School. Do you have any other comments you want to make?
it's essentially the same as the prior.
Okay, so I'll take a motion to approve. Moved by Director Hume, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Courier. Questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving this recommendation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the motion carries. And third, We are being asked to approve the non-exclusive cooperative sponsorship in wrestling between Burnsville High School and Blue Sky Online Charter School.
So this one is a little bit unique in the fact that there are accredited public online schools and there are online charter schools. The way that the Minnesota State High School League operates with online public schools, so say for instance we have a student that ends up at the online school through Houston Public Schools, there's no documentation needed if they're transferring from their home attendance school. So if a Burnsville student left our high school, enrolled in online at Houston, they would be eligible to participate in their home attendance school. With online charters, it's a little bit different. You have to do these non-exclusive cooperative sponsorships. So this essentially is for a student who found that online would be a better option and enrolled in an online charter. And so the online schools are allowed to hold multiple cooperative sponsorships by sport, because you'll have kids as far north as International Falls and as far south as Worthington, and how do you find one school? So the rule essentially is students can participate in their home attendance schools. So
Very interesting. Thank you. I will take a motion to approve the recommendation.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Hallweger. Questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving this recommendation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the motion carries. Thank you.
thank you.
Next, I will invite Stacy Sovine, Executive Director of Human Resources, to the podium. We are being asked to approve the proposed revisions and readopt the unchanged language in the 2019 to 2021 Master Agreement with the Burnsville Principals Association. Welcome, Stacy.
Good evening. Thank you. Bringing before you tonight again the tentative agreement with principals of our district. We have 23 principals throughout the district. We met about 4 different times beginning on August 23rd all the way through September, and really we only addressed 7 different language items. One of the main language items that we needed to address was around ULA, which is unrequested leave of absence. Similar to the teachers, the principals were also required under state statute to negotiate for the, at the end of the FY19 contract, a process for layoffs that was an agreement between the district and the unit. It's pretty straightforward. They already had some of the language in place. It was just kind of fleshing it out a little bit more and clarifying that process. The other item that we worked on was adjusting our long-term disability language. This is a priority for the district. It allows us flexibility with our benefits committee to review the best use of our resources as far as paying for premiums, and then those folks who are actually using our LTD, we're finding that it isn't the most efficient use of resources at this time. So we have to change contract language to allow that flexibility. On the salary schedule, we're looking at a $2,000 increase on the cells in the first year with a $1,500 increase on the second, a 2-year cost to the district of $157,000. The MSBA 2-year package increase is a 2.98% increase, and as you can see, that compares to a 4.67% increase the last time we negotiated with them. The package as a whole is within our board parameters, and making the recommendation as read.
Great. I will take a motion to approve the recommendation.
So
Moved by Director Miller, second. Seconded by Director Hume. Questions or discussion? I just had one comment. Just so folks are aware, in the part of the changes to the contract is that principals cannot bump for a promotional move. That if you're an assistant principal, you bump another assistant principal. If you're a principal, you bump another principal. But never the two shall meet.
And that also goes as far as grades with elementary and secondary. So an elementary building principal wouldn't necessarily bump a middle school or a high school principal because those are on different pay lanes as well. So there's 4 different tiers in a sense.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Any other? Nope. All those in favor of approving the recommendation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Thank you. Next, I will invite Dr. Battle. We are being asked to approve on a first reading basis changes to policies 202, school board officers, and 203.2, order of the regular school board meeting. Dr. Battle.
Thank you, Chair Alt and members of the board. Tonight, I bring you the recommendation to approve on a first reading basis changes to policies 202, school board officers, and 203.2, order of the regular school board meeting. These policies were reviewed by the Policy Review Committee on October 8th, 2019. The school board reviews all policies at least once every 5 years, and these policies were scheduled to be reviewed as part of the review rotation. There were minor changes to these policies. Policy 202, Section 3, Part A was updated to bring clarification to the role of the clerk and treasurer. And Policy 203.2 was updated to reflect our current board agenda format in Section 3, Part A for 203.2. You will see strike-throughs of the previous language.
Great, thank you very much. I'll take a motion to approve the recommendation.
So moved.
Moved by Director Chester, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Schatz. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the recommendation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Our next action will be to adjourn to a closed session as permitted by Minnesota Statute 13D.03 to discuss ISD 191's labor negotiation strategy. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Director Courier, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Holwiger. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Let's take